And in reality, because of what happened in the war, because the Nazis were defeated, the fascists were defeated, and American imperialism and the Soviet Union came out of it, essentially the victors of the world, that a new situation had arisen. Our specific tendency, viewed what happened after World War II in a very different light from the rest of the Fourth International, and that what we viewed, what was going on, was that there was a new capitalist upswing that was about to happen. Whereas the rest of the Fourth International was saying, no, in 5 years it's all going to be over again. It's in World War III. Basically what we've been saying, what we were saying at the time, was essentially that the destruction of World War II created a whole new capacity for capitalism to expand productively, and which I feel has been borne out by events. Because of that, the way that we had to function would be very different from the way that we were functioning before, in that we would have to get involved with mass parties. And there's many reasons for that. I think that part of the problem, and part of the reason there's so much splintering among the Trotskyist groups, is because they're locked in a closet. There's no connection to the mass movement. Workers don't go to small groups. They go to large ones. They go to their traditional mass organizations, no matter how horrible they are. They're going to immediately go to those first. It's a historical law. They always go to their traditional mass organizations first. They might build other ones out of it. They might split those into pieces. But they're not going to go to a group of 7 people. It's just not going to happen. They don't see them and they don't care about them because they don't feel like they can have any effect. So, a lot of times you have these little tiny groups, and because there's no mass echo from, working people who are involved, you get a lot of people who are talking to themselves and fighting over little things and end up splitting over them. When you're involved in mass organizations, this is one of the advantages of being involved in them. You actually have an ability to actually actively, participate in the struggles of working people as they unfold. So I feel like that's a big part of, one of the many reasons that we get involved in mass organization. Another one is that, quite simply, there's no way a revolutionary party is going to be built out of nothing. You can't do it out of 3 people and a dog. You just can't. So, given the nature of the whole world, given the nature of what actually came out of World War II, which was mass, in our opinion, what we call Stalinists, that took over most of the world, took over like half, a third of the world, something like that, and the imperialists that took over the rest. This is a new world situation that we had to kind of deal with. That's essentially how we function. We go within mass organizations, and we function as a cohesive Bolshevik center within them, even the most reactionary. And in our opinion, this is what Lenin, Trotsky, Marx, and Engels, what they would have done. And not that that's like, well, that's what we should do because they said it, but that's how we feel the most effective way to really mobilize working people, and also to create a revolutionary party, that's the only way to really do it. Let's see. So while there's all kinds of separate organizations that have been created, inevitably they end up kind of disintegrating on their own. It seems to me that this is the best strategy as far as Marxists in the 21st century, especially when there's many contradictory movements out there. The PSUV in Venezuela, the PPP in Pakistan, the FMLN, they're very contradictory. They're certainly not traditional labor parties, but the way to orient toward them is a real question. I did want to kind of go into the United States and how we function here, because this is kind of a unique situation. The United States of America does not have any mass organizations as far as political parties. What we have are 2 parties of the capitalist class. We don't recognize the Democrats as any kind of mass party of working people, or a party that's even recognized as such. The Democrats essentially have functioned as an electoral machine for the entirety of its existence, and has actually played a genuinely counter-revolutionary role in its past. So for those reasons, we actually fight specifically for a mass party of labor here, which we would be willing to join. Of course, we'd even be looking at other things. I personally think that there are many different possibilities. There's possibly like a mass populist party on the left could appear as well. I mean, these are all things that we as a tendency would consider as far as entering. At any rate, I think the only thing that we really can orient to concretely in this country, in the same way that we do in other countries, is the unions. And we do that everywhere, of course, but there's especially important here, where it's the only real mass organization that exists. But the way that we function with unions, I would say, is probably pretty different from the way that other Marxist or socialist groups function within them. We actually don't hide who we are at all. When we get involved in unions, the very first thing that we do is to try and build room, create room for radicals, create room for socialism. We try to create a base within the unions. And while the bureaucrats tend to hate that, it seems like working people, especially nowadays, where the kids barely remember Stalinism, and I know a lot of people here love Stalinism, but they barely remember all the, I guess, the lies of their parents. I'm sure we all agree with that. They barely remember them. They barely remember that even that stage in history where they hear socialism and they're not necessarily against it. They may not know what the hell it is. But at the same time, we can build that room. We can build a basis within the unions, and that's what we attempt to do. We work within sections of the unions that generally are like opposition tendencies. We work in even opposition tendencies that are not that radical. We have opposition tendencies that are just kind of left of the current leadership. And of course, if we agree with the leadership, we're not just going to oppose it because they're in power or whatever. It's concrete. We take a look at every situation within the unions and we determine what do we feel, given the situation, given the forces that exist in the world today, or in the United States today, I should say, what are we able to actually accomplish with what forces we have, what forces the opposition tendencies within the union have, and what actually is going on in the union, who's actually in power, which group. And so that's essentially what we do. Is we don't openly attack the bureaucracy as just snakes and worms or whatever. We try and outflank them. We try and say, well, why don't we do this instead? We create practical alternatives for working people that they can actually say, well, yeah, I agree, we should be doing that. So that's essentially our method. And it's worked. It's worked in within other countries. It's worked. I've seen it myself during this union organizing drive. I would say union organizing is probably quite a bit different. Union organizing is not like you have some open room to talk about whatever you want to talk about because you're under the complete dictatorship of the boss. But even still, there's a lot more room. You talk to people about world politics, what's going on in the world, how socialism relates to their lives as workers. These are the people that you're able to win over to socialism that way. They end up being the most militant unionists. They're the ones who are actually able to carry through things when other people are kind of wavered or worried about, well, how much am I going to make? Well, this guy can pay me more for this number of months. When they actually start thinking for themselves and becoming actual revolutionaries, they actually can become the most powerful section of that specific union effort, whatever it happens to be. So I guess another thing is this. I kind of touched on it earlier. Was the Fifth International that Hugo Chavez called? We are definitely orienting toward it. We feel that the situation, what's going on in Latin America, in Cuba and Venezuela especially, that these are essentially this is the leadership of the world revolution. It's a very contradictory process. We are always open about our criticisms of Chavez and always open about our criticisms of anyone. But at the same time, we support him when we agree with him. We feel like this Fifth International, because of the situation of the Venezuelan Revolution being at the vanguard of the world revolution, can actually create a real international. It has that potential.